World War I, also known as the Great War or the War to End All Wars. It is one of the deadliest conflicts in history, with an estimated 8.5 million combatant deaths and a further 13 million civilian deaths. It lasted for 4 years, 3 months and 2 weeks, involved more than 20 countries and spanned 3 continents. Countries lost sizable portions of their active male populations. People starved to death due to food shortages and succumbed to disease as a result of weakened immune systems caused by malnutrition. The world would forever be changed by the events of World War I, and it all began following a murder in Sarajevo. Welcome and thank you for joining me. The story I have for you this evening is one of murder in broad daylight and how the world was plunged into chaos. So make yourself comfortable and let's begin. It may seem like an over-exaggeration for half the world to go to war over the murder of an individual. And the truth is, this murder was merely the catalyst that ignited the sparks and set the world on fire. There were a number of preceding events that led us to this point in Sarajevo, events dating back more than 40 years before the start of World War I. While these preceding events are important for understanding how the world came to be in this position in 1914, it is the catalyst that we will be focusing on today. I'm speaking, of course, of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand visited the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo to inspect the Imperial Armed Forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, an area that had been annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908. It was this annexation that angered Serbian nationalists, as they believed territories belonged to Serbia. In fact, some Serbian nationalists were so outraged by Austria-Hungary's actions that they plotted to murder the Archduke. Their intentions were to break off Austria-Hungary's South Slav provinces so that they could be combined into Yugoslavia. The group of assassins was made up of Mohamed Mehmedbezic, Vaso Kabrilovic, Nedeljko Kabrinovic, Svjetko Popovic, Trifko Grabej, and Gavrilo Princip. These 6 young assassins were coordinated by Danilo Ilic, a Bosnian Serb and member of the Black Hand. The Black Hand were a secret military society formed in 1901 by officers in the Serbian army, and their goal was to unite all of the territories with a South Slavic majority, a goal in which Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina was in direct conflict with. But before a target had been painted on Franz Ferdinand's back, the Black Hand set their sights on a different man, Oskar Potiorek, the governor of Bosnia. It was during a meeting with Serbian irredentists in Toulouse, France, that Mehmedbezic was tasked with travelling to Sarajevo to assassinate the governor. However, en route to the Bosnian capital, police searched his train looking for a thief. It was in a moment of panic that Mehmedbezic threw his weapons from the train window, a dagger and a bottle of poison, leaving the would-be assassin without a murder weapon. Arriving in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mehmedbezic had no choice but to search for new weapons, and so his mission had been delayed. But before he could source new weapons, Danilo Ilic summoned him to the city of Mostar, and on March 26th informed him that the plans had changed and the target was now Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. It can't be said for certain, but had Mehmedbezic carried out his operation as planned, and the Archduke never assassinated, the chain reaction that ignited the world in 1914 may never have happened. In April 1914, Danilo Ilic recruited two Serbian youths, Kabrilovic and Popovic, still teenagers at the time. Shortly after, he recruited three Bosnian youths living in Belgrade, Serbia, Grabej, Kabrinovic and Princip, none older than 19. These were the five assassins who, alongside Medvesic, would be sent to Sarajevo to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. These two groups would remain anonymous to each other until the night before the attacks took place. The three assassins travelling from Serbia began their journey on May 28th, travelling via boats and trains, liaising with border guards and sergeants to cross the border into Bosnia and Herzegovina undetected. By sheer coincidence, Kabrinovic bumped into one of his father's friends, police detective Ivan Villa. The three assassins just so happened to board the same train as the Sarajevo police detective, and through innocent conversation, the date of the Archduke's visit to Sarajevo was identified, and the date of the assassination had been set. Their journey ended on June 4th as they arrived in Sarajevo, where they went their separate ways before reconvening later in the month. They would return to the capital with the intention of assassinating the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne on June 28th. The night before the attack, Ilic handed out various weapons to the six assassins who, on that same day, met as a group for the first time. The next morning, Danilo Ilic posted the six young men along the planned motorcade route, where they awaited the arrival of the Archduke. Ferdinand and his party were greeted at Sarajevo train station by Governor Oskar Potiorek, where 6 cars were waiting. 3 local police officers mistakenly got into the first car in the motorcade, where they accompanied the chief officer of special security. The special security officers intended to accompany the chief were left behind at the station. This would be the first of many security issues that would occur on this fateful day. The second car contained the mayor and chief of police of Sarajevo, while the third carried the Archduke, his wife, Governor Potiorek, and Lieutenant Colonel Count Franz von Harrach. The third car was an open-topped sports car, a Grafenstift 2832 PS. Security arrangements on this day in Sarajevo were limited. General Michael von Appel proposed that troops should line the streets of the proposed route, a sensible idea when a high-ranking political figure is to be paraded through the city in an open-topped car. However, he was told that this would offend the loyal citizenry, and so all security arrangements were left to the local police force, of which only 60 were on duty that day. The second mistake of this ill-planned outing. The motorcade made its way as scheduled, and approached the route where Ilic's men were lying in wait. Medvesic was first in line, waiting in front of the garden of a nearby cafe and armed with a bomb. As the motorcade approached and passed by, Medvesic failed to act. It's said that he lost his nerve, later claiming that a police officer had been standing nearby. Next to him stood Kabrilovic, armed with a pistol and a bomb, but he too failed to act, perhaps discouraged by seeing his comrade fail to take action. Further down the street, armed with a bomb, stood Kabrinovic near the Miljacka River. At 10:10 AM, as Franz Ferdinand's car approached, Kabrinovic threw his bomb. It bounced off the back cover of the vehicle and into the street, detonating under the next car, leaving a 1-foot diameter crater and wounding as many as 20 people. Kabrinovic swallowed his cyanide pill and jumped into the Miljacka River, but much like his attempt on the Archduke's life, his suicide attempt failed. The old cyanide within his pill was not potent enough to end his life, and only induced vomiting, and due to the dry summer, the Miljacka River was just 13 centimeters deep. Police dragged Kabrinovic out of the river, where he was severely beaten by the crowd before being taken into custody. The motorcade sped up and passed through the route at high speed, leaving not enough time for the last 3 assassins to take action, and as quickly as he had arrived, the Archduke had escaped the attempt on his life. The motorcade arrived at the town hall and continued with the schedule, which included a welcome speech by the mayor of Sarajevo. Understandably shaken, the Archduke interrupted the mayor, stating, "Mr. Mayor, I came here on a visit, and I am greeted with bombs. It is outrageous." Indeed, it was outrageous. Outrageous that after a brazen assassination attempt in broad daylight, that they would continue with their schedule and keep Archduke Franz Ferdinand out in view of the public. He was quite literally a sitting duck. Nevertheless, the speeches continued as planned, and discussions were held afterwards concerning what to do next. The Archduke's Chamberlain, Baron Rumerskirch, proposed that the couple should remain in the town hall until troops could be brought into the city streets to provide protection. Governor Potiorek, however, did not like this suggestion, not wanting to offend the loyal citizenry, and stating that the soldiers would not have the dress uniforms appropriate for the duties. Another disastrous decision that attributed to the many flaws in security that day. The governor put the appearance of the military's uniforms above the safety and life of Franz Ferdinand. Despite the lack of adequate security in the city, the Archduke's party left the town hall, choosing to visit the hospital and tend to the wounded from the bombing. They once again got into the open-topped sports car. However, not completely disregarding the Archduke's safety, Governor Potiorek decided that the motorcade should travel straight along the Appel Quay to the hospital, avoiding the crowded city centre. A decision that would save Franz Ferdinand's life, had it been communicated to the driver. It is said that Potiorek's aide, Erich von Marizzi, was in the hospital and so was unable to instruct the drivers on this change of course. In his place, Sarajevo Chief of Police Edmund Gerd was asked by one of the Archduke's aides to inform the driver. Unfortunately, he neglected to do so. It can't be said for certain, but it must have been a stressful morning, full of confusion and panic, which likely caused Gerd to neglect such an important task. After realizing that the first assassination attempt had been a failure, Gavrilo Princip considered a new position to assassinate the Archduke on his return journey. He posted himself outside Schiller's Delikatessen near the Latin Bridge. It was at this point that the first and second cars of the motorcade turned right, leaving Appel Quay and diverting from the revised route that the drivers were not aware of. The Archduke's driver, none the wiser, naturally followed suit and also turned off Appel Quay. Governor Potiorek called out to the driver to stop. The driver quickly applied the brakes, but in doing so stalled the engine. This wrong turn may not have posed any risk whatsoever, but in telling the driver to stop, they had unknowingly delivered the Archduke to his demise, as Gavrilo Princip was waiting just off to the side of the road. Princip seized this moment, for it may never come again. He stepped up to the footboard of the car and shot Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie at point-blank range. The weapon used was a Belgian-made Fabrique Nationale Model 1910 .380 caliber pistol. The first bullet caught the Archduke in the jugular vein, and the second in Sophie's abdomen. Princip then turned the gun on himself, but was apprehended and arrested before finishing the job. Sophie immediately fell unconscious and collapsed onto Franz Ferdinand's legs. Shortly after, while on the way to the governor's residence for medical treatment, the Archduke also lost consciousness. As reported by his chamberlain, Count Harrach, Franz Ferdinand's last words were, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children," followed by utterances of "it is nothing" in response to inquiries of his injury. But before long, these utterances were followed by a violent choking as the Archduke hemorrhaged. The imperial couple were dead by 11:30 a.m. on June 28, 1914. Sophie was pronounced dead on arrival, while the Archduke died 10 minutes later. All of the assassins were eventually caught. However, Medvedić had escaped to Montenegro, where he then escaped arrest again and fled to Serbia. He was later arrested on other false charges. Under the Austro-Hungarian law that prohibited capital punishment imposed on a person under the age of 20, many of those involved in the assassination were spared the death sentence, instead being sentenced to up to 20 years imprisonment, depending on their part in the plot. Danilo Ilic and Veljko Kubrilovic were not as fortunate, being sentenced to death by hanging and executed on February 3rd, 1915. A number of other participants were imprisoned or executed for their role in assisting the assassins. What followed was an angry exchange between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, leading to a letter being issued to Serbia detailing a list of demands which would later come to be known as the July Ultimatum. Serbia's response to this letter was less than satisfactory for Austria-Hungary, who then responded by breaking diplomatic ties and shortly after declared war, 1 month after the assassination on July 28, 1914. As you're probably aware, a great deal of the world went to war and would not come out of it for more than 4 years. While the entire war is a fascinating tragedy, there is far too much to cover in one video. Thank you for joining me for this story of murder. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Until next time.